So the conference will address several areas of philosophy, theology, and science to address the question about whether the UFOs and the proposal that aliens exist in other locations give support to the evolutionary theory that we can go from molecules to man in evolution. And so, what I'm going to be addressing is how philosophically and theologically, precisely in the context of aliens, how those actually there are philosophical issues that go along with aliens specifically, but also there are philosophical issues in the molecules to man, which then would impact their possible evolution on another planet, some other place. I'm also going to mention a couple of scientific facts because I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to get into that in too deeply, but there are some basic philosophical conclusions that can be derived from what we know factually on a scientific level, from what they're telling us, from what they're discovering. And then the last will be certain theological observations. For example, that a specific pope has condemned certain ideas, and we want to see if those apply in the specific case. But then we also want to talk about certain theological issues that not just affect the question of evolution and man. It's ironically the same set of questions that then slightly change that actually affect the question specifically around Adam and Eve, the creation, but also it's the same set of theological questions that become problematic in relationship to the positing that there are aliens on other planets. And so we will address those in the conferences and hopefully give an adequate explanation for why the proposition that aliens exist and this it accounts for the UFOs and that we think they exist because of evolution is untenable.
Okay, so Father Ripker, I'm wondering if you see a parallel, because there's nothing new under the sun. In past talks, you've mentioned one of the tactics that evolutionary-minded scientists, when they're lacking data for their hypothesis, they'll say, well, if given enough time, eventually this could happen. But as you've said, the upper echelon knows that this is not true, but maybe consider it a useful subterfuge. Do you see a parallel with a similar tactic being used today by scientists claiming that aliens could be the reason for things that are of a supernatural origin? Like, for example, the tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe, rather than explaining it by supernatural, because they know that there's no natural explanation for it, they'll say, well, it might be aliens that did it. I've actually heard that a number of times. Or natural or preternatural origin for things such as UAPs and UFOs. They don't want an explanation that's preternatural for UFOs, but want it to be natural. So they want it to be, something that's coming from the universe, other people, aliens, what have you.
That in my own particular domain, which is philosophy, because that's what my doctorate is actually in. If you pay close attention to what they're proposing, it actually violates one first principle and therefore falls subject to one informal fallacy. And so the basic principle that it violates is the principle of evidence. So the principle of evidence has a variety of different ways in which it's expressed. And basically it says that the degree of certitude is based upon the degree of the certitude of the evidence. So if evidence A, B, and C do not propose or give you certitude about the conclusion Y, then you can't say that A, B, and C are sufficient explanations for Y. You have to say, well, these are part of it. They may be part of it. There could be something to that or what have you. Now, in relationship to the principle of evidence also says that if there's a single, there's two parts of it. If there's a single piece of evidence contrary to your hypothesis, then your hypothesis or theory is either in part or in whole false. So, and this is something in which we actually see in relationship to this particular hypothesis, because, for example, the tilma or these other supernatural events, the fact of the matter is that there were certain things that were present that would not be necessarily explained or that are beyond the capacity of even on a natural level for these things to actually have occurred. So, for example, the tilma is one of those things where he simply gathered roses in his in the tilma, and then when he opened it up, there's this perfectly formed it's not even a painting. It's a form an image on there, which is not something that can be naturally caused. It's kind of the same thing in relationship to the Shroud of Turin or something like that. That there is the circumstances under which they say, well, it would require this, that, or the other thing, or that maybe aliens came and made the thing, or caused cries to rise, or whatever. This is simply not sustainable because of the fact that there's other contrary evidence. But the primary problem with the principle of evidence is that you can't assert what is not already, that isn't somehow in the evidence. There is no evidence of this. This is purely a theory. It's a theory that, well, maybe it was aliens who caused this. Maybe they came and maybe they did this. Okay. The problem is there's no evidence for this. They keep talking about it, but there's actually no evidence for these particular things to happen. This means it falls prey to a particular informal fallacy, which basically states that what is ever gratuitously asserted can be gratuitously denied. In other words, if you gratuitously assert something or speculate something of which there is no evidence for it, then without any contramanding evidence, I can deny that particular proposition. So the fact that they say, well, maybe it was aliens, I can say, well, maybe it wasn't. And then at that stage, the argument deadpans or it stops because there's no evidence on their side to continue advancing their things. And therefore, I don't have to provide any evidence. I don't have to provide any alternative explanation for it either. I don't have to argue that it's anything other than supernatural. I don't have to argue that demons couldn't cause it or that there could be the show that other natural causes couldn't be the cause. I don't have to provide that because they haven't provided sufficient evidence on their side.
So how then is it used? Do you see it in your line of work being used for the UAPs now and the UFOs, otherwise known as UFOs, being given a natural origin of aliens rather than the preternatural origin, which they likely are?
Yeah, and actually, there's a third possibility. So basically, when you're talking about UOs or UAPs, basically there's three possible explanations. There are three logical explanations. There are only two possible explanations. The first is that the logical explanation would be it's a logical possibility that there are aliens that are actually visiting things. That's a logical possibility. It's not a real possibility it doesn't constitute something that is plausible because of a variety of different scientific, theological, and philosophical reasons. The other two explanations are that it's diabolic, which is demons can cause these types of occurrences to where people think they see certain things, or that they actually see certain things, or they can imagine certain things and they don't know the difference between those. I'm going to talk about that in the conference, that there's the distinctions between an actual vision and an imaginative vision, and that demons can actually cause these specific things. So demons can play tricks on people, they can affect people's senses, etc. I don't think those would constitute even a majority of what we would call UFOs. The other plausible explanation, which is probably the more possible explanation, or the explanation that would probably have the most evidence for it, is that these are simply human activities or governmental experiments that could be certain forms of technology that have been developed, of which they don't want the general public to know. And as a result of that, because these things are possible on a scientific level, they may have already been discovered and may have been used. And there's some evidence to indicate that, maybe not enough, but that would be also one of the possible explanations. So you don't have to resort to the idea that aliens exist to account for UFOs. Those can be accounted for by other things. And it means very simply that because we already know the two possible causes of diabolic are also human or natural, then it would be contrary to the principle of economy to posit yet another different kind of a cause which doesn't have sufficient evidence.
Would you please explain the diabolical nature of the alleged evidence for aliens in the context of the widespread promotion of the molecules to man evolutionary hypothesis, both outside and within the Catholic community?
The question has a series of premises and complex answers to it, in the sense that there is a basic answer, which is there's no aliens, and it's not that they. Of course, the general hypothesis is that evolution, because it happened here, is happening in other places in the universe, and therefore, as a result of that, it's likely that there's other aliens, and then of course there is sightings of aircraft and things like that, UFOs and things like that, and then there's also the reports of people being abducted and things like that. So there's the idea is therefore that because they are there, because of evolution, then they evolve in our planet, and then eventually they became developed enough to where they were able to develop spacecraft, and then now they're here, and so it's basically the foundation for saying that there's aliens in other locations. Is specifically something that is not contained in Scripture, of course, because in Genesis we know that life is only created here. And so then the idea is with evolution is as well, it's not just here, it can be anywhere in the universe. And so there's this evolution happened elsewhere. And so as a result, the aliens then basically evolved into the aliens, and now they're here visiting us. And so this, the diabolic side to this is twofold. The first is that the demons want man to think that we're not pivotal in God's material creation. They want us to think that we're not special or pivotal in relationship to being at the pinnacle of God's creation, which had always been what the fathers and theologically what the church had always understand is that man is at the apex of all of the materially created order. He's not at the apex of all creation, because that includes the angels. We're talking about on the natural level. And so they want us to think that that there's these other aliens, and therefore the earth is not special, human beings aren't special, and that we're just one of many. And so this would then give foundation for saying, and because we're not special, there's no real reason why God would become incarnate here, because there's nothing special about man. He might have become incarnate somewhere else, etc. So there's all sorts of different theories that then arise from it once man is displaced from that particular central role in God's creation as we understood it from the book of Genesis. So there's that diabolic side of it. And then the other diabolic side of it is something which I'll be discussing in the conference, which is specific cases in which people who are possessed will report demons molesting them and doing certain things to them, which then become the, if you look at what we hear about with alien abductions and things like that sort, the parallels, if you strip the alien side of it and just put demons in, the parallels are completely the same. So what you're seeing in those two things are basically the same thing. And also it's also diabolic in the sense that somehow or another aliens would be hyper-focused on our reproductive organs, which is absurd, which is what you get in some of these alien abductions. But there's various aspects of the alien abduction stuff that can all be explained preternaturally. So those are the two primary ways in which it happens, the diabolic stuff, but then also in the context of the molecules to man evolution thing is to basically say that we're not special because evolution, they argue evolution happened here, which of course has got its own sets of issues, but then those issues aren't restricted to here. They extend to the entire universe because the same problems exist in the rest of the universe, and so evolution is not even possible there.
Okay. And do you see anything with regard to the time element? Because if the idea is that the universe has been around for billions of years, then there must be a possibility that aliens could develop over billions of years. And that's why there's a need for this idea of an old universe and an old Earth.
Yes, I think so. I think that I should say that's what the scientists propose, that because it's taken so long for things to develop here, because the universe has been in existence for every time. They keep, of course, with the James Webb Space Telescope, they keep increasing the time in which the universe has existed. And so they're basically saying that it's existed for, I think last time I looked, it was 13.9, but some are proposing 14.4. But anyway, billions of years. And so they think that over the course of time that this would actually then give the sufficient time for things to actually evolve. Of course, the real problem is that time is not people's friend. because the entire universe is subject. We know this just by observing other stars and things of that sort, that they are also subject to the law of entropy or to the second law of thermodynamics. And so as a result of that, there would not actually be evolution. That over the course of time, what would actually happen if there were mutations, that things would actually get worse in a specific thing. If it was actually, if life was created somewhere else, it would actually devolve. You're not going to have a case where time is actually going to cause the molecules to arrange themselves in such a manner, or things to actually occur so that it actually evolves, because of the law of second law of thermodynamics would deny that, not just here but anywhere else in the universe. So time is not the friend of evolution; it's actually the enemy.
So, Father Ripperger, why is it that you're not afraid to talk about a young Earth and the alien deception and all of these issues with evolution, molecules to man evolution as its center, where so many seem to be afraid to address this from a Catholic perspective and even science and philosophy as well?
One of the first classes I had in philosophy, the professor talked about the fact that we have to be willing to follow the truth wherever it leads, regardless of the personal cost. And I think that a lot of people don't want the reputation to suffer, or for people to think they're crazy, that they're actually addressing topics which are considered, quote, settled science, or that a majority of the people actually believe in things of that sort, when, of course, what people believe has or think has no bearing on the reality. And so I've always been heavily committed to following the reality of what is the truth here, and if it is, then I'm willing to investigate it. And if I look in people's mind like I'm crazy, the craziness is really in the fact that people are not willing to follow the truth, because a lot of times, as we find out, it's like it's like the conspiracy theories. They find out that like 95% of them are actually true. So it's the same kind of a thing here, in the sense that the I have never had any conviction in relationship to evolution as a viable thing from the very beginning. From the first time I heard it I think it was in either eighth or ninth grade when I heard the proposition. I'm just like, that's just absurd. And so and since then, of course, studying philosophy and theology, I'm willing to go there, and I'm willing to actually question these things. And also, I agree with Hugh in the sense that Hugh Owens, in the sense that these things have drastic theological consequences. If you believe in evolution, you've got some serious issues that are going to arise in areas that have to do with original sin, which is actually one of the topics I'm going to be discussing in this whole conference. You've got some serious issues that theologically become basically unsolvable. That's one of the things I'm going to say, that even the guys that were trying to propose solutions to this in the 80s, when this stuff was first starting being talked about, those solutions are unsatisfactory. They don't solve the problem. And I realized they were just kind of put it out there. And I'm also the type of guy that that maybe this is just the way I was raised. It has to do with the fact of being a mechanic, that I know that if X is not physically possible, then I'm not going to worry about the fact that other people think it is, when I know for a fact that it isn't, and I'm just going to go with that, and that's where I'm going to go. But part of it also, I suppose, has to do with the fact that I've always been one of those guys that was willing to say the very thing that nobody else wanted to hear. So,
well, God bless you for it.